Commercial planes are slower today than they were in the 1960s, and yes, that is a true fact. We live in a world where your iPhone can use more computing power in a few seconds, generating a deepfake of Mario and Luigi, than the computing power it took to get to the moon. But yet, a Boeing 777 takes longer to fly across the Atlantic than a Concorde did when your parents were still chain-smoking indoors. I mean, in 1969, the Concorde was hitting Mach 2, that's over 1,350 miles per hour, while today's average long-haul jet plods around at 550 miles per hour. Which means, technologically speaking, commercial air travel peaked at the same year as Woodstock. However, things may be starting to change. But first, let's talk about why we've slowed down. So specifically, let's go back to that Concorde plane. Because that plane wasn't just fast, I mean, it was absurd for the time. The Concorde flew so high, 60,000 feet, that passengers could literally see the curvature of the Earth when they were taking a commercial flight. At that altitude, you could also see all the middle-class peasants stuck in coach below you, eating cold chicken on a 747 like Dickensian orphans. Flying Concorde was basically cosplay as Zeus, and for about $12,000 in today's money for a round trip, you could go from New York to London in 3.5 hours. That's less time than it would take to watch The Irishman, and unlike The Irishman, it didn't feel like your soul was slowly leaving your body the entire time watching it. But of course, Concorde had problems. Big ones. The sonic boom made it illegal to fly supersonic over land in the United States, which meant your 3-hour New York to London flight was amazing, but your New York to LA trip still took longer than sitting through a Fast and the Furious sequel marathon. And then there was the problem of fuel consumption. Concorde burned through fuel like a frat house burns through naughty light during Pledge Week. At full throttle, it used up to 25,600 liters per hour. And on top of that, as mentioned, the tickets were just absurdly expensive. It was essentially a flying country club for celebrities, CEOs, and anyone rich enough to get divorced 4 times and still be able to afford a living. Phil Collins famously used Concorde to play Live Aid in both London and Philadelphia in the same day. And yes, there were accidents. I mean, in July of 2000, an Air France Concorde crashed after hitting debris on the runway, killing 113 people. Combine that with rising fuel prices, stricter safety regulations, and post-9/11 air travel paranoia, Concorde was retired in 2003, which means the fastest civilian passenger flight you can take today is a Delta connection from Atlanta that arrives only 6 hours late instead of 7. Progress, people, progress. And here's the thing, once Concorde died, airlines just gave up on speed entirely. They leaned hard into efficiency. Enter the Boeing 747 jumbo jet, the Airbus A380, aka the flying cruise ship, and the Dreamliner with its mood lighting that makes you feel less like you're being slowly dehydrated by recycled farts. Planes became bigger, quieter, and more fuel efficient, but they never got any faster, which is why, in 2025, we're still basically flying at the same pace as the Nixon administration. So the dream of supersonic flight is dead. It was an evolutionary dead end like Blockbuster or MySpace or your hopes and dreams. Everyone assumed we'd never get back to the golden age of commercial speed. Airplanes would remain the same, slow, boring, and eternally trapped at the exact velocity needed for the guy in front of you to recline his seat directly into your kneecaps. And yet, in the background, while you were distracted with TikToks of raccoons eating hot dogs, a group of engineers in Colorado started quietly saying, "What if we could bring this back?" So in 2014, a man named Blake Scholl walked into the scene and basically said, "What if we made Concorde, but this time we don't really mess it up?" Now, this guy is a former Amazon executive, a former Groupon guy, and a general tech bro with the face of someone who definitely owns multiple Patagonia vests. And so he decided to name his new company, his new idea, Boom Supersonic. And this is a very controversial company, but here we go. So unlike Concorde, which was a joint vanity project of the British and French governments and cost equivalent of about $14 billion in today's money, Boom is a private company, which means its first real accomplishment wasn't going supersonic, it was convincing Silicon Valley billionaires to throw cash at them instead of yet another crypto Ponzi scheme. And billionaires, well, they did throw the cash. Over the last decade, Boom has raised over $700 million, and not just from investors with too much money, but from airlines. actual airlines. In 2017, Japan Airlines invested $10 million in Boom for future aircraft. And by 2021, United Airlines ordered 15 of Boom's Overture jets with the option for 35 more. Which is bold because United is not usually associated with innovation. United is mostly associated with dragging doctors off planes and accidentally sending your dog to Japan. But the orders kept coming in. American Airlines signed on in 2022 with a deposit for 20 Overtures, which means the two biggest US carriers, the ones who currently can't even board passengers without sparking fistfights in gate areas, they basically said, yeah, we want our future to go Mach 1.7. And that number is important. Boom's aircraft want to go Mach 1.7. That's around 1,300 miles per hour. That's faster than the speed of sound and fast enough to get from New York to London in 3.5 hours, essentially the same speed as the Concorde. So Boom's flagship aircraft is called Overture. It's designed to carry 65 to 80 passengers, run on 100% sustainable aviation fuel called SAF, and fly at altitudes of 60,000 feet. The plane is sleek, sexy, and eco-friendly in theory. In reality, it's an unbuilt plane with a suspiciously good Instagram account. But to get there, Boom needed proof. So in 2020, they built a demonstrator aircraft called XB-1, nicknamed Baby Boom. Now, Baby Boom is actually 71 feet long, seats exactly 0 people, and is designed to test whether this thing can actually break the sound barrier. When it rolled out in October of 2020, Boom proudly declared it was the first independently developed supersonic jet in history, which is true, and also the equivalent of saying, yes, my garage band is technically the first group to record a live album in my mom's basement. It is a very cool achievement, but let's not put it to be the next Apollo 11 on the timeline of human greatness. But the symbolism still mattered. Concorde was state-funded prestige. Boom was a private startup ambition. It was Silicon Valley confidence, which is basically the ability to pitch impossible ideas with a straight face and then let venture capitalists hallucinate dollar signs. And then in 2022, they broke ground on a factory in Greensboro, North Carolina, where Overture will be built. Boom has also made friends in Washington. In 2022, they struck a deal with the US Air Force to explore using Overture as potential military transport. Which makes sense because if there's one group that loves fast, expensive things that break all-time records, it's the US military. But here's the crucial difference from the Concorde. Boom has made the point of branding Overture as not just fast, but also profitable. The Concorde never turned a profit. Boom says Overture will. They argue the economics have changed. New materials, better aerodynamics, more efficient engines. They're promising tickets at around $4,000 for a round trip across the Atlantic, which is still a lot, but not astronomical. It's the price of a slightly used Peloton bike or one Taylor Swift concert ticket in 2025. And if they succeed, Overture could redefine global travel. Imagine San Francisco to Honolulu in the time it takes to finish a bad movie, or Dubai to Singapore after watching a few episodes of Love is Blind. Now, I want to take a pause here because while Boom's promises are sexy and hot and just a good vibe, it's still very much a tech startup. Their marketing is full of clean animations and vague words like sustainability and revolutionary. The exact same words Elizabeth Holmes used before she started filling Walgreens with broken blood machines. And yet the industry is taking them fairly seriously, which is incredible because the aviation industry is famously skeptical. These are the same people who thought in-flight Wi-Fi was witchcraft until about 2015. For them to bet on Boom, it's basically the equivalent of your grandma buying Bitcoin in 2013. It's either visionary or it's going to end with a lot of people saying, well, that was not a good idea. Still, Boom stands out because it's not just engineers tinkering in a lab, it's building actual infrastructure, has airline orders on the books, and has an army of investors behind it. And unlike the 1960s when supersonic flight was about the Cold War prestige, today it's about speed, efficiency, and capitalism's favorite word, disruption. So that brings up the obvious question. If Boom has all this money, all this hype and momentum, why the hell aren't we already flying in one? And here's the catch. Bringing back supersonic flight isn't as simple as saying, make plane go fast again. Because if it were, Ryanair would already be offering $12 flights from Dubai to New York, where the safety briefing is just the flight attendant screaming, good luck, into a microphone. Supersonic commercial planes face a massive, soul-crushing pile of roadblocks. And these are not the fun kind of roadblocks like Mario Kart's banana peels. These are the kind that make governments say, actually, just please don't do this. So first, and arguably the biggest, is the engines. Boom Overture does not currently have an engine. I know it's a big issue. That's right, the plane that was supposed to carry you across the Atlantic at Mach 1.7 is, at the moment, basically a very pretty drawing of a paper airplane. In 2020, Boom partnered with Rolls-Royce to design supersonic engines, but by 2022, Rolls-Royce noped out harder than a dad being asked to chaperone a high school dance. Which means Boom is now pitching to investors with the same aviation equivalent of a car commercial where the car is invisible, but trust us, it goes really fast. And even if they do find an engine partner, here's the problem. Supersonic engines are absurdly hard to make. They need to be efficient at subsonic speeds for takeoff and landing, but also handle the insane temperatures and pressures of going Mach 1.7 at 60,000 feet. The last people who solved this puzzle were literally French and British engineers chain smoking in the 1960s. And now Boom is like, don't worry, our startup in Colorado will totally figure it out. Trust us, guys. Now, the second roadblock is noise, specifically the sonic boom. The rulebook still treats shockwaves like public enemy number one. Certification targets are written for a world that expects silence from a jet doing science fiction things. To change that, the path runs through community sound trials, new noise contours, and a bureaucratic scavenger hunt where every forum asks for the same diagram drawn a different way. However, for the noise stuff, NASA is working on this with their X-59 Quiet Supersonic project, which is supposed to reduce the boom to a thump. And that sounds promising until you realize the FAA still regulates this industry like it's 1973. Essentially meaning even if Boom figures out how to make it quieter, the government is still going to need decades of testing, paperwork, and congressional hearings where some senator from Wyoming who's never been on a plane says, but what if the sky gets too loud? And then again, there is the fuel problem which the Concorde faced. Overture is supposed to run on 100% sustainable aviation fuel, as mentioned earlier, which again, that sounds amazing. Until you realize sustainable aviation fuel is currently about as common as a straight 70-year-old male going to a Taylor Swift concert. Not to mention, SAF costs 3 to 5 times more than regular jet fuel, which means unless Boom figures out how to print fuel from air, those $4,000 tickets are going to skyrocket to the point where only Jeff Bezos and maybe a couple Kardashians can afford them. Then there's also the money problem. Building Overture is projected to cost between $6 and $8 billion. And that's a lot. I mean, that's the GDP of a lot of small countries. That's more than the Marvel Cinematic Universe has spent convincing us that Ant-Man is somehow important. And Boom is trying to raise that while competing with airlines that are famously cheap. And remember, these are penny-pinching maniacs who once floated standing room tickets and onboard scratch-off lotteries, and then acted shocked when passengers asked for oxygen with price tags. These are not patient long-term investors in innovation. These are all really greedy companies who will put you in a middle seat next to a bathroom if they can save $4 on fuel. Then there's also the airport problem. Supersonic planes are loud even when they're not booming. They take off and land at higher speeds, they need longer runways, and are a nightmare for airport logistics. You think JFK has delays now? Imagine trying to fit in a fleet of supersonic jets between Spirit Airlines flights to Fort Lauderdale and Delta flights to Atlanta that are already showing up 3 hours late. It would be absolute chaos, just actual chaos. It would make LaGuardia look like a Zen garden. Another thing is the environmental concerns. Supersonic jets emit more carbon per passenger than subsonic planes. Way more. And this comes at a time when the entire world is trying to figure out how to not boil alive in 40 years. So yes, governments are slightly reluctant to greenlight an aircraft that basically screams, climate change, never heard of her. Boom's counter-argument is that their planes will run on SAF and eventually be carbon neutral, which is a nice story, but it's also the exact same story BP told us about solar panels while they quietly kept drilling into the Gulf of Mexico. And yet, despite all this, there are some glimmers of hope. In 2020, the FAA announced it would start working on new rules for supersonic testing. In 2022, the International Civil Aviation Organization started reviewing whether noise restrictions could be loosened if aircraft got quieter. And NASA's X-59, which is supposed to make its first flight tests pretty soon actually, could pave the way for new overland supersonic routes. All this means is that some of these roadblocks appear to be going away. So now let's imagine, despite all of the roadblocks and the hope, that somehow Boom actually pulls this off. and that somewhere in North Carolina, home to Kitty Hawk's first flight, and an entire research triangle of engineers who dream in CAD files, let's just say that there's a gleaming white jet called Overture, and that it actually takes to the skies at Mach 1.7. Suddenly, if that were to happen, the world would have changed. You could fly from Los Angeles to Tokyo in 6 hours. 6! That's faster than it takes Netflix to cancel shows after 2 seasons. And well, anyways, that speed would be the dream. A new golden age of air travel where speed actually matters again. Where instead of spending 9 hours miserable crammed into a flying Greyhound bus, essentially, you get there in half the time. Where business executives can literally say, "I'll be back home before dinner," and actually mean it instead of just being creepy dads in 1980s movies. And if Boom succeeds, there will be a catch. The first people to benefit will probably not be you. The average passenger in the back of Spirit Airlines flights to Orlando are not exactly going to find themselves on a supersonic jet sipping champagne anytime soon. Now, the first people to fly supersonic again will be the same people who currently own 5 houses, 3 yachts, and the moral compass of a raccoon digging through your garbage. It'll be celebrities, billionaires, and the kinds of corporate executives who say synergy in PowerPoint presentations while their employees are quietly Googling union lawyers. However, eventually these ticket prices could come down. I mean, that's the theory. Boom says they'll start at around $4,000 for a round-trip transatlantic flight, which, to be honest, isn't really that bad compared to some of the standard flights that you can take that are not Ryanair. And over time, as the technology scales, the dream is that more people could afford it. And that's where the future gets interesting, because once you normalize supersonic speed, you don't just change luxury travel, you change business, trade, politics, everything. And here's the thing about the future of supersonic commercial flight. It doesn't end with Boom. Boom is just the flashy startup face of it. It might be some flash in the pan that goes away, or it could be the Tesla. I mean, behind the curtain, there are already competitors. Hermeus, based in Atlanta, is building a Mach 5 hypersonic plane. Yes, Mach 5. That's New York to London in 90 minutes, which sounds amazing until you realize TSA will still take 2 hours to check your toothpaste. Venus Aerospace is promising space planes that can go from Los Angeles to Sydney in an hour. And the military is foaming at the mouth for this. DARPA, the Pentagon, the Air Force, they're all looking at supersonic and hypersonic travel like kids at a candy store. But this also means that future supersonic commercial travel could be tied to something we probably should avoid, which is war. I mean, the same tech that could let you get to Tokyo before your DoorDash order arrives is also the technology that could drop bombs anywhere on Earth in 90 minutes. And yes, that is terrifying, but it's also exactly the kind of thing that governments will shovel billions of dollars into. Which means companies like Boom could benefit from trickle-down military contracts, which would mean once again war driving innovation. And if you think that governments won't fund this kind of project, I mean, think about this. The Pentagon literally funded a $1 billion blimp that couldn't even get off the ground. If you tell them you'll build a jet that goes Mach 5 and can carry a bunch of people on it, they'll throw cash at you like you're a strip club and the stripper's name is national security. We could also talk about the future of airports. I mean, if supersonic becomes real, airports will have to adapt, which means longer runways, new soundproofing, and probably even higher ticket prices to cover the costs. And don't kid yourself, airlines will be charging you extra and using this as an excuse. Want to board supersonic flights? Great! That's $500 for priority boarding, $200 for a carry-on, and $100 to use the bathroom. And the bathroom will still have the lock broken as it does every single time. For the future of the environmental issue, there's actually 2 ways to look at this. Because right now, climate policy is on a collision course with supersonic aviation. And it's all dependent on whether Boom and the sustainable aviation fuel can actually scale. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then Boom is basically trying to sell everyone a cigarette subscription service in the middle of a lung cancer awareness campaign. But here's the thing. Some scientists argue that supersonic aircraft could actually make sense if they replace private jets, because private jets are disproportionately polluting already. And if you put 70 rich buttholes on one supersonic plane instead of scattering them across 15 Gulf Streams, that's technically greener. Will this happen? Probably not, but at least Boom can try to pitch this idea. And if this were to also happen in the future, which is still up in the air possibility, what happens after supersonic? The next logical step would be hypersonic commercial travel, Mach 7 commercial travel, suborbital flights that hop into space before dropping down across the world. And at that point, the line between airplane and spaceship completely disappears. You'd basically be buying a Delta ticket to ride on a rocket. But of course, knowing humanity, will probably find a way to mess this all up. The first supersonic flight will probably be delayed for 3 hours, your Wi-Fi won't work, and someone will still recline their seat into your knees. But at least, you'll get to complain about it at twice the speed of sound. And if you liked this video, please check out my documentaries playlist, where I have a lot of other videos just like this on that playlist. So click on that, and I'll see you guys in my next video when you click on it in just a few seconds.